Good guy, Rhaegar.
Good guy,
My perspective.
Question mark.
Which he knows way more than that.
Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, son of Aerys II, husband to Elia of Dorne, father of Aegon and Rhaenys, brother to Daenerys, the last dragon, prince, warrior, scholar, lover, musician, dreamer, kidnapper, rapist, homewrecker, cheater, bigamist, conspirator, instigator of war, breaker of the feudal contract, self-absorbed, pretty boy.
You really have to add those titles there to make him match Daenerys.
Rhaegar is possibly the most divisive character never to be seen on page in Children's books.
Yeah, you had a really interesting stat here, though. He's never seen on page, but he's mentioned 141 times in the main series and 34 times in the World Book, which really actually is amazing to hear that.
It does. It really obviously speaks to how important he's going to be to the story, to the narrative. Other people who are mentioned a similar amount of times would be his father, Aerys.
Yeah, with 165.
Yeah. And Elia of Dorne is mentioned 70 times.
And Lyanna's mentioned 39 times.
Yeah. All this highlights how important these people all are in the backstory, although Lyanna, I feel like, is purposefully shrouded in mystery.
And we'll get into that in some of the pre-drafts we've seen of the World of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood and stuff like that. Like, there are some differences that point to him obscuring that.
Yes, purposefully obscuring. So, welcome to Good Guy Rhaegar. I'm Lady Guinevere from Lady Westeros.
And I'm Ashea from History of Westeros.
And we're missing our third panelist.
It would have been Lucifer Means Lightbringer of Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire, but he's a hardcore Rhaegar fanboy, so maybe we're better off.
And we have a little bit more balance. So we're going to basically go through points about his character, his actions, and his motivations, what we know of them.
And then we're going to talk about our own assumptions about Rhaegar, theories we have about him, and throughout this we also want, if you have questions or thoughts, you can raise your hand. We're going to do, Q&A throughout it, if it fits with what we're talking about, within reason.
Yep, okay. So we'll, end up addressing whether being the last dragon was a good thing, but, should we want Targaryens back? Can his reputation be rehabilitated in the fandom, or more specifically, maybe more importantly, within the story? Different characters seem to have a pretty negative opinion of him. Can that be changed? Will it be changed? Should it be changed? What's the impact of an RLJ reveal on opinions in fandom and in story? So I think we'll start by going through those points of what we know from the text, starting with some examples of how he's characterized by the author, by the characters within the story. Their thoughts about him.
And we get a lot of different perspectives on him, with a lot of different thoughts about him from pretty early on. Early on, obviously, Daenerys thinks about him and thinks that he died for the woman he loved, and we see that Daenerys very much thinks of Rhaegar as a heroic figure, as a good person, and meanwhile, at the same point in the story, we're hearing the opposite, that he kidnapped and raped Lyanna from Robert's point of view.
Yeah. So I believe it's clear that the author is trying to confuse us. We're supposed to be feeling doubt and being conflicted about this character. One character who I feel very importantly does not think really about Rhaegar in a negative sense at all is Ned Stark. Thinks about him often, and at one critical point in Game of Thrones ends up comparing Rhaegar and Robert, and Rhaegar comes out on top. So,
and we all know how much Ned cares for Robert.
Yes, so that says something.
And something else that says something is that the Martells really don't portray themselves as resenting Rhaegar at all. Their anger is, pretty much entirely focused on Gregor Clegane and Tywin, and they are still trying to work with House Targaryen. They do not seem alienated by this decision.
Right, yeah. Jorah Mormont calls him the last dragon, which is another, I'd say, favorable characterization because he's comparing him to Viserys. And again, Viserys is very negative. What does he say? The shadow of a worm or something. And Rhaegar was the last dragon. Sort of glorious characterization.
And then, of course, we have this, I think of it as a kind of iconic Rhaegar quote that really says the most we learn about Rhaegar, which is about, I don't know that we want to read the full thing out. If we do, we can. But it's the quote about how Rhaegar was bookish to a fault, and he shows that he is hardworking and dedicated, and that if he puts his mind to something, he'll do it, and that he has a lot of skills.
Right. Whatever it was that he learned through his studies led him to believe that he had to be a warrior, implying that he had some destiny. He felt there was some destiny upon him, which I think probably speaks to someone who's dutiful and wants to do good in the world.
And I personally tend to think of Rhaegar as obsessed with prophecy, is too preoccupied with it, but that is subjective.
Yeah.
We don't really know how consuming that was for him.
Right. Hat tip to Shadowjack on Twitter, right here. No. I heard it. I thought perhaps. Okay.
He's back here.
But,
He's back here.
here. Hello. You commented that the use of the term obsessed was a pejorative. And I think that you're right, that the term dogged in pursuit of truth was a pretty good, alternate way of thinking about that. So then we have Barristan, who's a very concrete thinker. He sort of sees things very black and white. He has lots of thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, he says that Rhaegar, quote it, "Your brother Rhaegar is still remembered with great love, for one." So
yeah. But he also says, "I'm not certain it was in Rhaegar to be happy. There was a melancholy in him, a sense of doom. He was born in grief, and that shadow hung over him all of his days." And then Dany's trying to get some information about her family from Barristan, and he tells her that there is good to be said about her family, about all of her family, her grandparents and her father and her mother, her great-grandfather, and Rhaegar. And actually, Rhaegar, he says him most of all.
pretty good endorsement.
Yeah, pretty good endorsement.
And I will say, I mean, the World of Ice and Fire also says Prince Rhaegar at 17 was everything that could be wanted in an heir apparent, which sounds pretty good. Like, I mean, he's learned his stuff. He is prepared to take the mantle of power.
He's a model prince. But then again, Yandel also says, despite his crimes, Prince Rhaegar was no coward. So it's sort of like a backhanded compliment.
As we'll get into here, Yandel isn't a huge fan of Rhaegar.
Not really. So that's his characterization. But then, what about his actions? We do know a fair amount about what he did, at least towards the end of his life.
Yeah, we know that he fought valiantly at the Trident, and we would expect that, considering he dedicated himself to learning how to fight.
Right. Yeah. So that was part of his destiny, I suppose. We have a good quote from George on the question of rape that someone had queried of him. Gosh, that's 20 years ago.
Yeah, 1999. Yeah, 20 years ago.
Someone asked him about Rhaegar and Lyanna and what the situation was there. Obviously, most likely referring to that, Robert's opinion that we mentioned. And he said, that's a revelation that we need to wait for later volumes, but if you're uncertain about it, I am glad. One thing I wanted to do was suggest the uncertainty of truth. I mean, think about it in our own world. We don't know what happened between people like Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, or other people that, the point being, it's very hard if you weren't there to know the truth of what happened. Mm-hmm. He does say the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna may be similarly elusive for a time.
Mm-hmm. And as we touched on already, Ned, doesn't think about Rhaegar very often, but he doesn't think badly of him. But as well, as you're familiar with, all of the kids are familiar with this story that Westeros as a whole and Robert Baratheon believes, but that makes sense. Why would Ned lead them to believe otherwise?
Right.
So.
Right. He's obviously trying to obscure something. So his kids are just left to think badly.
Yeah.
His kids, John included.
Yeah.
So
John is left to think badly of his own father.
Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Dany seems to think that Rhaegar just abandoned his wife and ran away with Lyanna, and she's a bit confused by that. Doesn't seem to resolve the question in her head, or just wonders why.
And other people think similarly. Cersei, notably, she doesn't think of it as a kidnapping and raping.
Right. No, they all, Cersei, Kevin Lannister, Barristan, they all just seem to think of it as this sort of
sordid love affair.
Yeah, like he dashed off with her, but with no other details offered. Mm-hmm. So this was the thing you were mentioning.
Yeah, and this is from the World of Ice and Fire, where in the World of Ice and Fire it says, Rhaegar would once again come face to face with Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, and with her light a fire that would consume his house and kin and all those he loved, and half the realm besides. Whereas the change line said, Rhaegar fell upon Lyanna Stark of Winterfell and carried her off, lighting a fire that would consume yada yada yada.
Right. So this seems to be, this change from the earlier draft to the second draft is the author purposefully obscuring the agency on Lyanna's part that's implied by that earlier version, which brings the narrative in line with the perspective of Maester Yandel, who's not really terribly sympathetic.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to give this to some Baratheon rulers as well. Like, maybe he also isn't sympathetic, but he also knows his audience.
Right, yeah, so he can't really be like, oh yeah, she went willingly. So, this is that question, that thing that, George kind of touches on a lot about the way history is written. And then we have, let's see, over here, this one.
That one? Yes. We also have this other quote here. But for the madness of Rhaegar's father, Aerys II, a prince of Dornish blood might very well one day rule the realm, but the upheavals of Robert's rebellion brought about the end of Prince Rhaegar, his wife, and his children. And so in that quote, you see that Yandel is kind of, causes of the rebellion are further obscured here.
Yeah, I mean,
it ties it into a lot of other things. Some of it has to do with the race there, and just yeah.
He seems to blame Rhaegar on the one hand, but then a minute later he's like, actually it was Aerys. But what were his motivations for any of the actions that that he did here?
And the main thing we know is all the discussion of prophecy that he had, both with, Maester Aemon there, and with things that he's discovered in scrolls. Obviously, his history with Summerhall, which is, where he's born, and his family, was demolished, a huge portion of them. So he was born in this, he was born in the shadow of Summerhall, and it makes sense that he would think about these things, because Summerhall, to be clear, was rooted in prophecy, the fact that happened,
right.
Which we'll also continue to get into.
But I think one thing to think about is that if he had a prophecy, thought he knew via a prophecy what his destiny was, or perhaps even his family's destiny might be, based on that prophecy, that would also lead him towards a kind of melancholy bent that he thinks he's going to die in the service of saving Westeros, and that his family is going to be wiped out in that process.
Yeah.
That's going to make him melancholy in
Yeah.
addition to his origin story.
Yeah, true.
So now we kind of get into the, that's pretty much what we know about him.
Yeah,
right?
really.
From the text.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the show, you know he has a bad wig.
Yeah.
You didn't learn anything much about Rhaegar in the show, for example. Like in seeing that, you don't actually see actions.
Right. No, you don't.
Oh, we have a question back there?
Yes.
Well, it's more of a comment.
Speak up a little bit.
Given Rhaegar's comments to Jaime about action should be taken and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
could you really think that he was just making all that up for his benefit if he thought he was doomed to die, or did he actually think he was going to go and win it out and actually do these councils and things like that?
Just in case anyone can't hear, and because there's a recording of this, I will say that the question basically asked if Rhaegar truly thought that he was doomed to die, or if he thought that he could win it all,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah. Well, I think.
Do you think that the way you were portraying it, you think that he really thought that he was going to die?
I think that he probably thought there was a good chance he might die in fulfilling whatever the prophecy was, but I think that the Robert's Rebellion was extraneous. I
Okay,
don't think that
so
was
not die on the trident.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
I don't think that is what he expected to happen at all.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think regardless of what Rhaegar knew, the context seems to be that he understood the prophecy surrounding him to some extent. So even if he didn't speculate that he was going to die on the trident or wherever it was, he had information from very early on in his life, right, that something bad was going to happen. Maybe he understood he had to interpret it a different way, but he knew regardless of what that interpretation was, it was going to be negative regarding the people around him. So I think that's what's hard when you're dealing with Rhaegar is we judge him when we don't have much information, but it's like what we learn in George's world is once you have perspective, you flip on these characters. You're like, oh, if I was, but anyway, yeah. So I agree. I think it comes down to understanding those details
Yes.
as to how Rhaegar looked back.
Yes, I agree.
It wasn't a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No, comments are good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, given that this is a song of ice and fire, and we understand that Jon has the heritage of ice and fire, at least we think we understand it.
Yeah.
Do you think that marrying a woman of Dornish heritage who has the water magic from the Rhoynish, was there some part of the prophecy that Rhaegar was going for towards birthing Aegon?
I don't think they're that familiar with the idea of that. I don't personally think so. I like the idea of that, and I would like to see more of that water magic, but I really don't see it going that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel differently.
No, I don't.
I think, honestly, the Targaryens have married into the Martells historically, so it was just a house that they could marry into, and in those past marriages, it didn't have anything to do with that, so I don't think it would now.
Yeah, I don't either, and I think in the case of Rhaegar and Emilia, actually largely what we've learned from the World Book and from also Oberyn's perspective as well, that match seemed to have been largely planned by Aerys out of spite. Not for any really great sadly for her, I guess.
I just had a comment. I'm wondering if their relationship is similar at all to like Jon and Ygritte's in terms of Jon was the one who stole Ygritte, but Ygritte was really the instigator through it all, and it seems like a very northern thing to do. So I'm wondering if Lyanna could have been more of the instigator on this whole thing to begin with, and it was like it had more agency than I think a lot of people think.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we see some of that, when Rhaegar, sang her a song, and Lyanna was into him and charmed by him and would have gone for it. She was the type of woman that would go for things that would, be the knight of the laughing shield and
Right.
laughing tree.
He might have written her that song because she asked him to. Sing me a song. Think of the prophecy. We should get married.
That's how it usually goes. So, yeah, this is the part where we get to our, more of our assumptions, personal assumptions. So, what is your,
Personal assumption
Yeah.
about this? Definitely going into this panel and thinking about it, I was way more negative towards Rhaegar than I am right now. I still think his execution leaves a lot to be desired. My impression has been that he treated his wife so poorly, and that was a huge deal breaker for me. But in preparing this and with the idea that the Martells weren't turned off, it makes me wonder if Elia herself had more agency here, and if she was okay with this, and if Rhaegar actually did, if he married Lyanna and Elia gave the okay, and it wasn't some betrayal, in which case that changes my opinion pretty significantly, but we still can't say that. But I think that is a pretty big clue that maybe all was actually pretty okay between Rhaegar and Elia. So that's one element of things. And I mean, yes, he definitely has his good qualities that I touched on already in terms of, being a hard worker, being dedicated. He's a good musician, I mean, like, there's things to like about Rhaegar, but in terms of, I can't help but compare him to Ned Stark in a lot of ways, because I feel like there's a certain sense of honor and duty, and you can prize that and treat people that are closest to you really very poorly. Again, we talked about Ned not telling his children the truth, and they're like, Jon is led to believe his father is a rapist, and we talk about, for example, Ned never told Catelyn, his wife of a long time, like eventually you think that you could tell your wife at least. And so similarly with Rhaegar, if he really didn't respect his wife well enough to do that, to talk to her about things, that's a big point off of him for me.
Yeah.
But if he did do that, I'm more on board with Rhaegar.
Yeah. I want to just give you my opinion, and we'll take a couple more questions. I think that there is just too much conflicting information. And the bad is mostly circumstantial. From the people that know him, we get mostly good people that knew him. And the bad stuff just seems to be stuff that we don't know. The details are so obscure in this. We have that quote from the author that it's done purposefully. So I take and encourage a wait and see approach. We have been promised that more will be revealed, and so my opinion is we should suspend judgment until we have much more to go.
So yes, question mark.
Yes, Cynthia.
Yes, he was obsessed with there must be 3 dragons, 3 heads of the dragon, and if Ilya couldn't have any more children, if there was a way for him to annul that marriage and still maintain the credentials of his, without turning his present children into illegitimate children, that would, I'm sure, been done as well.
Yeah, well,
you would think.
I mean, you would think that he could just legitimize him, but then he would still be a legitimized bastard, and that's a different thing in Westeros.
Yeah.
It is, and personally, I've always been a fan of the idea that Rhaegar, now I do think it's pretty likely that he did marry Lyanna. But before I thought that was likelier, I was more of a fan of the idea that Rhaegar didn't think it was important to have to marry her, because he just thought the 3 heads of the dragon, he was going to have a girl. Doesn't matter if it was legit, if the girl was legitimate, he was going to have, he had Aegon and Rhaenys, he was going to have a Visenya.
Yeah.
And so that is what I had thought, and not like Rhaegar knows what he was going to get, but I kind of thought he was just thinking that's what would happen.
Right. And the things like, we see themes of this now playing out in the show where John's saying, certain things just don't matter when you're fighting, a war to save humanity. And if that is what he thought was going to happen, he may not have considered this issue to be at all important, and to have like a 10-second tangent into sort of real-world mythology. I'll just point out that King Arthur, who was the king that was supposed to save Britain, was not necessarily a legitimate prince. He was conceived, according to legend, outside of wedlock. So it didn't matter though, because he was, in that story, he was the prince that was promised to save the land. So that's a magical thing, not necessarily a legal or social thing.
You also, I feel like this is just a comment, but it's a little bit interesting with Rhaegar marrying into Dorne, which is sort of the most accepting culture that we have in Westeros. So the idea, I feel like, of him actually maybe marrying two people, if anybody was going to accept that and roll with it, I feel like it would be the Dornish.
The Dornish specifically have paramours. They are, one of the most polyamorous cultures we see in Westeros, and or in all of Song of Ice and Fire, really. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point of why Elia would maybe just not be completely turned off by the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, what we don't know about Elia is a lot. She could well have been fully in the know about prophecies or what the stakes really were, and there was this idea that there had to be 3 children, and she knew she couldn't have another. She definitely could have been. There's nothing in the text to suggest that she objected.
On the subject of Elia, I think it's interesting. We don't get a lot about her, but we get a lot of Oberyn, and she, spent a lot of time with Oberyn, and the kind of person that he is. You could maybe infer some things about Elia herself, I think, as well. Despite not actually getting a lot of her character or her actions in that, you still see someone that she was very close to.
Yeah, and he is open.
Yeah, he's open.
Tony said, yes.
Yeah. Back there.
Yeah. Do you think with the new, or not with the new, but the dance and these POVs with the Dornish, do you think that we'll get any kind of closure with Elia at all, or any more thoughts with, or knowing about how she felt about all of this?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I hadn't really considered the idea of getting more of Elia's perspective in the Dornish chapters. I don't know which characters really what they would know, but perhaps Arianne has heard more tale, and we'll think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, a good call.
Yeah. If anyone, it would have to be Arya. Yeah. I had actually considered the fact recently that Ariel Hotep would have known.
Okay. Yeah.
Would have known.
Yeah, I would have known her personally, which is obviously best if we can get someone firsthand who's experienced her.
If you think about it, there aren't that many characters left, especially point of view characters. If he's not the only one. Well, Barristan, reversing it.
Yeah.
But we've already gotten his perspective. So as far as people giving their opinions that we don't already have, I think it could come from him. I would definitely appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do.
So you talked about a lot of the social
You
implications.
speak up a tiny bit.
You talked a lot about the social implications between Rhaegar and Elia, but what do you think about, because the panel is called Good Guy Rhaegar, what do you think about his responsibility in regards to his father, Aerys, and how Aerys ruled, as well as his responsibility to Elia and their children during the war and their safety?
That's one of my biggest complaints in terms of his execution of everything, which is, he knew his father. He knew the sort of things that he was doing and that he had the risk of doing, and he kind of just let it happen and didn't. And he was thinking about more important things, you could say, but family is important too. And what do you do in that situation when your father, the king, is acting like that? I don't know what he should have done there. Like what Rhaegar could have done.
Them to Dragonstone. Why wouldn't he get them to Dragonstone?
Yeah,
He keeps
that's a
leaving
good
their
point.
house.
At least,
Dragonstone, they're not.
Right.
Why couldn't they go there with Rhaegar and Viserys?
It's a very good point, and I think that's one of the weakest things you can say about his decision making is that he really failed them. I would just point to, not in any way to excuse that, but point to things that he said to Jaime, where Jaime was begging to go with him to the Trident, and Rhaegar said, I can't take you away from him now because he's using you as kind of a, I don't use the word crutch, but well, it was hostage, yeah. I didn't use that terminology, but he basically was, my perspective there is that he was trying, Rhaegar was trying not to rock the boat. He expected to go to the Trident, win, and come back. He didn't expect to lose. That's the key takeaway I get from that conversation that he had with Jaime when he said, things will happen when I come back. He thought he was coming back, and had he come back, then Elia and his kids would have been fine. Nothing would have happened because don't forget, Aerys didn't actually.
What about all the other people Aerys is burning?
Well,
that's the thing is that even if he saves his wife and children, I don't think he's concerned enough about what his father's doing.
What he's been doing. Yeah. Well, I think that's what brought him back from the Red Mountains. I believe that he went there and was probably kind of in the doghouse with his father himself because Aerys was so paranoid. He thought, Rhaegar had been conspiring against him, and I'm kind of the opinion that, he may have been hiding out there. But then these things started to happen, and, he burned the Starks, and then Chelsted, and I think that's probably what brought him back to King's Landing. He thought, well, I've got to go do something.
We got a couple.
Well,
Where should we start?
go round the room.
Sean.
So Tyrion,
I promise we're not biased.
So Tyrion, I would say, is a protagonistic, if not heroic, character. We're supposed to like Tyrion, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much did he do to stop Tywin? Tywin's done a lot of pretty terrible stuff. Are we
Tywin-
judging
Tyrion
Tyrion
has a
negative
lot
for
less
letting
power.
Tywin get away with it?
Yeah.
What's that?
I think Tyrion has a lot less power to stop Tywin.
He may, but
It's one.
we've also read his thoughts.
He
Does
also
he
doesn't
constantly
know what's
lament
happening.
over the things his dad did and what he could have done to change it? He doesn't seem worried about
No, he
it.
doesn't seem to.
He derives his power from Tywin as well. But
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Couldn't take over the King's Guard and he has no plan to the throne. I just think everywhere was Rhaegar.
About how you thought that Rhaegar's marriage to Elia was engineered out of spite, and can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so you get the perspective, Oberyn tells Tyrion the story of how he and Elia and their mother went to Casterly Rock, and she was trying to forge a marriage between Oberyn and Cersei and Elia and Jaime. And at the same time, Tywin was reserving Cersei for Rhaegar. But Aerys didn't want that to happen, and he was angry, I think, with Tywin. We get that whole from the rule book, how Aerys was paranoid, resentful of Tywin. I believe that it's very possible that he was aware of this prospective, marriage pact that they were trying to form, and that he went purposefully to the Princess of Dorne and said, you know what, I want Elia for my son.
You can
Tywin's not going to have
also
her.
see the spite there because Aerys was quite racist.
Yeah.
And did not like the Dornish. So for him to arrange a marriage with a Dornish woman, he would never do that unless he was trying to give a big FU to some people.
Right. There was a big message there, I think.
Is there any evidence for why specifically, I guess, what spite he would have borne against Rhaegar that he would have?
I think it was more directed towards Tywin, but I do think that it doesn't seem like Aerys and Rhaegar had the best relationship.
Yeah.
I feel like Rhaegar would have said, he would have, at some point, I would hope, have confronted his father about his erratic behavior, and his father had paranoia about Rhaegar, and so it's, you know, it is spiteful to Rhaegar, but mainly I think it is mostly directed not towards Rhaegar.
Yeah, no, to be clear, the spite was directed at Tywin. So Aerys forming that marriage was, you know, at view to Tywin, and not anything else, you know, any other real master plan.
So, sorry if you covered this already, I came in late, but what the fuck was Lyanna thinking when her family was getting killed and the whole year that she was with Rhaegar?
I mean, I think during a lot of it, she just couldn't really travel.
Yeah.
Is my perspective,
Yeah.
on the timing on that, is that she couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think likely.
Otherwise, I think she would have. I think
Right.
Lyanna's the person that would have picked up and left.
I mean, think about it. They're pretty far away, and I'm pretty sure that they didn't know exactly what was happening because they were, you know, hiding out in this lonely
Well, but
watchtower.
at some point Rhaegar left to rejoin the war.
He went back to King's Landing, but it was after, well after the Starks had been killed, and even after Chelstead
But
was burned.
you have to think at some point, like, that information got back to them.
Right.
The fact that, like, the Kingsguard, like, joined up with them or.
Yeah, I think that information getting back is what brought him back to King's Landing, to sort of take over.
But she is wondering that if he got that information, did Lyanna find out that information at the same time and choose not to go? Or, I mean,
Did she simply not?
Did she simply not? Simply couldn't go? Is it possible maybe she didn't find out? I hope that isn't the case.
How far pregnant would she have been when she found out?
Exactly. She had a difficult birth.
Really pregnant. She was very pregnant. Would have been very pregnant. As far as we can tell from the timeline, she probably was, you know, deep into her pregnancy, within maybe 7 or 8 months pregnant when the battle tried to happen. So, yeah.
Do we think?
Yeah, okay.
Do we think Aerys knew the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna? Because otherwise, his behavior with the Starks doesn't make sense. If he knew the truth.
Well,
but he was
I
mad.
think
So
his
the question
behavior
is.
makes sense, more sense if he knows the truth.
yeah. Well, I mean, my theory is that he knew the truth. I believe he also knew that Lyanna was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and that the whole thing came out of his extreme paranoia that there was some sort of plotting, which he already suspected from Rhaegar, and that this sort of Mystery Knight gambit by Lyanna fed into his extreme paranoia, and he thought there was something going on between the Starks and Rhaegar.
And it was a convenient excuse to kill them off.
Yes, exactly. All he needed, really, he needed only just the tiniest excuses.
To follow what you were talking about earlier, if Rhaegar had won on the Trident and defeated the rebellion and returned to King's Landing and had his council and taken action against Aerys to the point that he deposed him and took power as king, how successful do you think he would have been in that role as king?
Well, you know, all we can go by is the characterizations, the stuff we were talking about before, which is that even Maester Yandel, who was not terrifically sympathetic towards him, called him a perfect prince. You know, he was everything that you could want in an heir apparent. So, you know, I think he had.
To be fair, we've also had some other heirs apparent that were perfect and didn't turn out so well when they started ruling.
True.
You know, like Aegon the Unworthy was, you know, not known for being terrible. He was like, you know, not perfect prince, but you know, that was the case for sure.
Aerys himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Aerys
I mean,
himself
there's
was not
this thing
always like that.
about absolute power corrupting. So, I guess, you know, you can't really say for sure, but indications are that he prepared himself, and the characteristics that we know of him as far as diligence and dedication indicate that he would have at least made an effort, I think, to be a good ruler. But
That's all we really want out of a king, a ruler. Just make an
Just
effort.
try.
Middle effort.
Does that mean? So I promised to send in a question, but because you guys have summarized it a lot, the crux of what's interesting about Rhaegar is the fact that the reports we get of him from first-hand accounts are positive, as you said, right? Generally very positive. But we have these actions that I think Eliana asked about, where negative, like clearly was making poor decisions for the loved ones around him. And those are such contrasting ideas. So the crux of the entire discussion is, why was Rhaegar behaving in this way? What information did he have? And I guess the first part is like, do you have any speculation maybe on like specifically what he read in the scrolls that made him decide to be a warrior all that time back, or any information got past that then? Because that's, I feel like, where the really like, why is Rhaegar thinking and behaving the way he is comes into play.
Well, we have again, not to shatter Jack. Yeah. If he thought that, you know, his family might die, if there was something in the prophecy that made him think that this was what
The Targaryens must end, will end.
yeah, that his
Whatever.
whole line was going to be wiped out, or maybe that his, you know, even that his first family would die, it could possibly be that specific. It's possible that his actions attempting to avoid something like that drove him towards the fate, which is completely in keeping with what we see George, the whole, you know, conundrum of trying to avoid prophecy, actually leading you to fulfill it. And, you know, there's this weird part of the prophecy that we hear way up in the north, via Melisandre, well, via one of Stannis' men, that go, you know, first the father and then the son to wake the dragon. So that's something that the fandom kind of argues about, because it doesn't seem to fit anything unless you maybe think about Rhaegar and then Aegon and then another one after that. So if you think of Rhaegar as the father and then the son, and then another son would be the dragon. It's a possibility. Again, with prophecy, we all know the famous words about prophecy. It's hard to. Yes?
I don't expect anyone to be persuaded, but my personal theory is that he was a dreamer like Daron, and I don't think these are prophecies he read in the book. I think he had dreams. And that rightly or wrongly, he was convinced that one of his sons was going to die, and there was nothing he could do about it. And so he needed to have two. And he might not even know which one, but he needed to have two sons because he had a dream that one of his sons would die.
Yeah.
A second son.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
I have no evidence. I'm just working backwards from I think he was a good guy.
Yep.
So that would explain the actions that you took.
And then it makes a ton of sense because of everything we know about, you know, Targaryen dreamers. That a lot of what we know about this so-called prophecy actually comes from dreams more than anything.
It explains him being very mopey.
If he was having these weird.
He's going into a future he can't change.
Right. And everything he does seems to drive him further towards that.
But with these dragon dreams, there's usually an element of misinterpretation.
Yes.
Of, you know,
Just
they
like
see
that.
this thing and they think it's something, and it's completely, you know, it's not that at all.
Right.
And so, you know, it is food for thought, which is if Rhaegar were dreaming and this is what he ended up with, what might he have been dreaming of and misinterpreting, or maybe he actually interpreted it pretty well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about these dragon dreams is oftentimes it's tragic. You know, the outcome of these dreams, and the more they try to avoid whatever fate they feel is being laid upon them in these dreams, it leads them further into tragedy. So I expect that would be the case with Rhaegar, that, you know, whatever his motivations turn out to have been, it's going to turn out to be tragic more than sort of intentional.
In wasn't it Torrance started with the name?
Mhm.
And then when they had, was it 2 days of consult back and forth, working out the contracts for it now? It's always, I've always thought that there's responsibilities in being a king of the north. As far as prophecies and things like that, the White Walkers, you know, there must always be a Stark and Winterfell. And the Pact of Ice and Fire was like, by the time Rhaegar got put them along, was like, what, 300 years old?
Not quite that long. No, it would have been more like 100.
170.
Something.
150
something
years.
Still,
Yeah.
but still, yes.
The duties, I feel like Torrhen would have had to have made clear that if you're gonna rule the North, you've got to know about certain things.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
And that these things are things that you will have to be aware of, which would be the wall, the reason for the wall. The White Walkers is not just the wild things. Because, you know, you go so far back into the Starks is White Walker Starks, you know, the 13th Lord Commander and everything. So there are things I do believe that Torrhen had to have made him agree to before he hit the knee. And a princess was one of them. And it was, until Leanna come along, that was the only time the prophecy was actually fulfilled.
I think that's, I like the idea of a lot of that. A couple of things. One is just how unmanned the wall was in terms of showing that the Starks weren't really maybe remembering the things that they need to remember, and how much they actually would have been able to communicate at that point, you know, 300 years before. It's like at that point, the Torrhen would bend the knee. I don't know that he would have had information to share, and Aegon didn't exactly, you know, put a lot of men into the wall. But I do like, in general, the idea of, you know, the root of prophecy, and in Jon of, you know, ice and fire and all that. But ultimately, I don't think that Torrhen. I think the Starks, as one of their problems, is that they forgot some of the things they needed to remember.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, yeah.
This is kind of related to that, but I've just been wondering. So the scene in the House of the Undying where Dany sees Aegon, and George confirmed that that was baby Aegon.
Yeah.
That Rhaegar says his is the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
How is his the Song of Ice and Fire? Where does ice come into that baby? Like, why would he say that? And does he know that there needs to be a baby with ice and fire? And where would he think the ice came from?
I think that it
just says his wife.
Yeah,
I think it was something that was ongoing in his, you know, ongoing in his sort of understanding.
But remember that he looks at Dany when he says that.
Yes, which is absolutely.
So is he not talking about Aegon?
He seemed like he was talking to her when he was looking.
But he looked at her and said there must
But
be
he says
one
it to
more.
Yeah.
So he says his is the Song of Ice and Fire.
I don't know.
The dragon must have 3 heads.
I wouldn't.
There must be more of that understanding.
Yeah, so, you know, he could be saying his Song of Ice and Fire, you know, his song will be complete when we actually have the ice to go with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be one more.
One of the 3 heads, and, you know,
He
this
already
is all.
knew he was gonna cheat on his wife.
This is all coming, you know, it's all coming out of his interpretation of prophecy. So he's, or a dream, perhaps, you know. So his ideas of what the Song of Ice and Fire might be could be something that was involved over time.
What do you guys make of Rhaegar's relationship with Maester Aemon and his like? What do you guys think? Did Aemon know?
I think, you know, I think
They were pen pals.
It's
or
clear
whatever?
that they were pen pals, and they shared a lot, and Aemon seems to know about the prophecy.
He sure does.
I mean, but Aemon also had, you know, experience with this tragedy at Summerhall, with that happening to Egg, and, you know, obviously, you know, his, to be clear, Maester Aemon's brother, Aegon Targaryen, Egg, died at Summerhall, and due to like prophecies, occupation with prophecies. So you would think that Maester Aemon might be more of a moderating force in those discussions, but you also might think that he's all in, that he was convinced as well, and that he was like, even though I lost all my family, this is important.
And what he talks about how he and all his brothers had dragon dreams.
Right.
And they dreamed about things. And Egg talks about their uncle Aerys the First read that the dragons would return. It was a prophecy that the dragon. So this goes back to, the roots of Aemon's family, his childhood, that this sort of prophetic. Don't forget, this is fairly soon, well, not that soon, but their Targaryens are longing to have their dragons return. They still have dragon's eggs. They still have lots of them, and they want to regain that, and perhaps.
So like, it's like Aemon's big shield with Jon Snow, duty, that all, that seems to me so encouraging to me to put like that extra juicy bit of irony into not knowing, a lot of people think that Aemon knew that Jon was, it just seems like it would just be like that extra.
Yeah.
I think if Aemon knew, it would have been clear. I don't think Aemon knew. Which is weird. I think he should have known, but I still can't see him knowing and not talking about it with Jon.
But that fact that he actually talked about all this stuff without knowing.
Yeah, so it obscures things a lot.
Which is why we all love him.
Unless we have anything else important, I think we want to just pose some we just wanted to food for thought.
Food for thought that we wanted to leave you with. We sort of addressed it at the top of the panel, but was Rhaegar being the last dragon a good thing? Should we be worried about getting Targaryens back? Are they really that essential?
Should we be hoping for relief if or when they're all gone at the end of the series?
Right.
Is that something we should be expecting due to all of this, both Jon and Dany to be dead, for the Targaryen line to end?
Well,
they are the Targaryen line.
It depends on if you want to really break the wheel, as Dany says in the show. If you want to break the wheel, then the Targaryens have to go.
Yeah.
Because it destroys the monarchy, and then a republic, a political system can come in place.
Do we really need that?
It's interesting when you get into the idea of a line ending, by the way, because obviously the Targaryens have married, the Baratheons have Targaryen blood. Do the Baratheons have to also, are they also all going to be
want to stamp out every
do
last
we want to, or does this prophecy extend to that, how much we're giving the prophecy, if we're saying that this is what's going to happen.
Draft.
I would say the Martells. All the Martells going to die because they have Targaryen blood? I don't think so. There's a droplet of blood, I don't know.
So can his reputation be rehabilitated? That's really, I think that's the crux of it. Do we think that there's going to be some reveal in the future that's going to lead all of us to be like, oh, of course, what a great guy.
Too complicated.
Can Jaime?
Life isn't that easy.
Colin Reed was the only one, right? Because he was there for the night of the he might have been there when she met him for the first time, and that maybe we
But I still think there's more to it than the Lyanna stuff that will shed light on Rhaegar's character and rehabilitating him. Like we talked about Elia as a factor, for example. There's other things that can shed light on.
Maybe Ariel does have
Maybe
They might. There could be other people that show up that knew Rhaegar. That we haven't seen yet. And
right.
So I tell us where to go. There could be maybe one of his squires might show up.
History's in
If he'd won,
he would have been
Last thing here. We gotta wrap it up.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, the thing to consider with Rhaegar is even past everything we talked about today, like, his birth alone is shrouded
My,
a massive amount of mystery. It's so
Yeah.
remains one of the most mysterious events that, like, we need more detail on. And that's, like, Rhaegar's murder.
Yeah.
And it only gets cloudier from there. So, like, is there a reveal that, like, more information will shed more light on Rhaegar? Like, yes, there's detail that is going to change your opinion. Maybe it's not to the overly negative about Rhaegar, like her myself, clearly. But yeah, there will be more detail that sheds your opinion. In my honest
Yeah. I think we have to wrap it up, but I will end by reiterating that the author has indicated that there is no truth to this story, that there's more that he hasn't told us yet, and all will be revealed in due time.